Unit 8 began with a little bit of preparation for assignment number 4. First, we read Hewitt's 2011 definition of motivation and his classification of 7 sources of motivation. In this reading, we saw motivation be defined as an internal state or condition that activates behavior and gives it direction, a desire or want that energizes and directs goal-oriented behavior, and an influence of needs and desires on the intensity and direction of behavior. And then within this, we saw the 7 different kinds of motivation. Those are stimulus response, where a person will respond to an external stimulus, obtain a conditioned positive response, or avoid a conditioned negative response. Social motivation, where we work to kind of achieve affiliation or acceptance. The biological motivation, which we do to activate senses such as taste, touch, or smell, and then decreased hunger, thirst, or discomfort. The cognitive motivation, which means we kind of maintain attention to something interesting. We try to develop meaning or make a decision. Affective motivation, spelled with an A, to increase good feelings or decrease bad feelings, or increase security. And then there's the conative motivation, which we do to meet our personally identified goals, obtain achievement, and then develop or maintain our self-efficacy. And then our spiritual motivation, which we do to sort of increase our understanding of purpose, or appreciate ourselves in relation to the universe that we live in. That's going to come back later when we do Unit 8 assignment number 4, but I just thought I'd give you all the definition right now, just so that you kind of have an idea of it when we come back around to it. Next, to start off this actual first assignment, we read one page from DeLucia and Lizenza's 1995 article, Student Disruption, Disrespect, and Disorder in Class Seminar for Faculty, and one page from Carbone's 1999 article, Students Behaving Badly in Lecture, to get an idea of kind of how the student disruptions have been around in lecture prior to the popularity of the internet. And then we read 2 brief article excerpts, one page from Fisher's 1987 article titled Boredom, Construct, Causes, and Consequences, and then another abstract of Aldridge and DeLucia's 1989 article, Boredom, the Academic Plague of First-Year Students. And this was, again, to document the existence of student boredom in lecture prior to the popularity of the internet. So we're talking about kind of disruptions, outbursts, and then boredom in the classroom here. In these articles, we actually learned about how students would take newspapers into class, or they'd take naps, or just chat openly with their classmates. I mean, just showing really disrespectful behavior. We like to think of the internet as kind of, I guess, being this easy way to distract ourselves in class. And while I think that can be true in some sense, ultimately, the reason that students are kind of allowing themselves to get distracted is not because, the internet's right there for them to get distracted with. It's more so because the material that's maybe being taught in class, or just kind of what they're working with, is not what they generally find to be interesting, and so they're looking for any kind of way to distract themselves. And nowadays, I would say the most easy way to do that is with the internet, but ultimately, I mean, people have been distracting themselves for a long time, and back then it was maybe newspapers and whatnot, but that's not to say that the internet invented this or made this a new phenomenon, because it didn't. We then read a review paper by Gernsbacher and Pomerantz with no date, which summarized the results of nearly 100 different studies. We learned a few different things from the study, one of which was that students feel motivated to bring their laptops to class because they might like to use them to take notes. This is one of the most commonly cited reasons, and it makes sense, anecdotally. I feel like I only ever take my laptop to class just so I can take notes on it. The same article also explains that most students who use their laptops for purposes unrelated to class are simply bored and seeking stimulation, and that many students prefer to sit in locations that are optimal for their learning goals, such as the front of the class. They don't like the idea that using a laptop might mean that the professor will require them to sit in the back of the class. As we saw in some of these readings, where professors would oftentimes allow laptops in their classroom, but because they felt that they were maybe being too distracting for some, they might require those with laptops to sit in certain locations, such as the back of the class, because that way, if they were, participating in kind of inappropriate behavior, like Googling things or watching videos, then at least the idea is that they're not distracting people. But in reality, the truth is that more often than not, these laptops are being used to learn, and that by kind of banishing these kids to the back of the class, that they're being put in a less ideal situation, and it's being made harder for them to learn because they can't sit at the front where maybe they want to and where they're the most engaged. Finally, we read the results section from a paper by Modded et al. 2004 study. And this is actually where they talked about the kind of reasoning behind why some professors will sort of banish people with laptops to the back of the classroom. And also in the study was where they found that student nonverbal responsiveness, so things such as eye contact or head nodding when a professor asks a question, had large impacts on teacher job satisfaction and teacher self-efficacy. So basically this kind of was a little bit of a sort of a kind of argument against laptops in the classroom, because the idea is that when students have those laptops, they're more distracted and they're not as engaged with the material. But as we see here, like, professors appreciate it more when they get like physical responsiveness from their students, because it kind of shows that they're paying attention and that they're engaged. We were then tasked with creating sort of a creative solution to kind of deal with all these competing motivations. And realistically, I don't think that's entirely possible. I think, laptops are always going to be a tool that could be used to be distracted. And even though most students don't use them that way, the reality is that that is something that they're capable of. But if I had to come up with a solution, I believe that the simplest and most effective way to resolve all these different motivations is to just kind of leave things as they are presently. And I mean leave things such that, like, don't like move kids with laptops to certain areas, and like don't ban laptops, because ultimately they do seem to be the most convenient tools for students to learn with, and they don't seem to disrupt the learning environment more than like any other tool would. So like a newspaper, or the things we talked about at the beginning of class, like a magazine or a journal or anything like that. I think that while they can be problematic, it's more just kind of like as a result of the underlying temptation to be distracted, rather than because laptops actually facilitate that. Assignment number 2 started with us watching a BuzzFeed video called What It's Like to Binge Watch a Show. And basically the gist of this video is that it's this short 1.5 minute video of this girl kind of going through her daily life, and like at any given time she's watching like the show that she's watching. So like while she's cooking or while she's just sitting on the couch, like she's watching the show. She just doesn't let up. Like she's calling people at the same time while she's like watching the show, and she's at like a birthday party. Like she's totally absorbed in it, and she's not like like appreciating any other part of her life. And it's just kind of this funny little comical thing, which is actually meant to be a segue into the lecture video for this assignment, called Why Do We Binge Watch? In this lecture video, the professor talks about a lot of different answers to the question of why do we binge watch. She shares at least 12 different motivations for binge watching. She mentions how we binge watch because it's usually commercially free, because it allows us to develop deeper connections with characters. It's what a lot of young people do as children, etc. I mean, there's just a very good like kind of skew of reasonings that are shared, and honestly they make a lot of sense, and they really do build up kind of to answer the question of why do we binge watch very well. For my discussion post, the one motivator that I decided to discuss was that the idea that we binge watch things because we also did it when we were children. The idea here is that because we do things as kids, we're more likely to do them when we're adults too, because we kind of have like this positive sort of feeling around them. It brings sort of a feeling of nostalgia and comfort to go back and kind of redigest material that we a lot of times experienced as a kid. I know that I do this myself plenty too. There are certain movies, like kids movies, that I'll go back and I'll watch just because I do find them entertaining and I remember them from my youth. I watched a lot of movies as a kid. We still have like hundreds of cases of DVDs sitting around in our living room. And I mean, I think that was pretty normal for a lot of people that I know. So it's definitely like a familiar kind of feeling, like going back and just watching these television shows or watching these movies, just because it's so kind of homey and comforting, and it's just nice. But yeah, I would say for sure that, it's motivated me to binge watch, just like in present day too. Like I know there are plenty of shows that I would watch, just because it's easy for me to, I've done it before and I'll do it again. But I definitely have movies or shows that I like to watch over and over again, and even just new stuff too. Sometimes it's fun to just sit down with a new show and just sit and watch it and watch it and watch it because, you have the time. Yeah, but after writing up a discussion post about that and sending it out, that was all my work for assignment number 2. Assignment number 3 began with me going back to assignment number 1 for this post and then reading all the comments or all the original posts that had been made by my other classmates. And then I went out to find another classmate who made a post about sort of conflicting motivations about laptops in lecture that were similar to mine and least similar to mine. I first went to Sydney because I noticed that her plan wasn't very much like mine at all. She talked about how making class more interactive for the students could be a good way to kind of keep them engaged. She talks about how she has some classes, like math classes, where she goes in and the teacher hands out a packet for everyone every day, and then as they're kind of going through the class, they work through this packet together. She also talks about how they're allowed to take notes kind of whatever way they please, be it on paper or digitally, but that at the end of the day, it's sort of about working on this packet and kind of not, being distracted because there is work to do. I began with my comment by complimenting Sydney on her ability to kind of compare like a real life scenario to this question. She did a good job of giving like a really perfect example to kind of back up her idea of keeping class interactive by bringing in, the packet. And then I also was able to connect with it pretty easily because I've also had math classes in the past where, you walk in and there's like a packet or there's a series of problems up on the blackboard to solve and things like that. And so even though kind of reworking classes to make them more engaging didn't match my original idea, I was still able to kind of see the good in it and realize that there were merits to it, and that honestly after hearing about it I kind of like the idea of making class more engaging for students to sort of kind of prevent them from getting distracted and then complaining about it. So that was a good post, I thought, for sure. And then after that I went to find someone who had a similar idea to mine, and I found Nicole's post where she talked about how she would allow laptops to be used for note taking, and how she would kind of give seating options such that students could sit wherever they wanted to kind of allow the engagement to grow. And then incorporating like breaks into class and allowing for discussion and like creating opportunity for group work. I told Nicole that I agreed with her idea of allowing laptops in the classroom and allowing students to kind of work with them to take notes, because ultimately I think they're too convenient and good of a tool to kind of take them away at this point. And I just wanted to comment on her idea of allowing laptops in the classroom because I did think that was a good idea, but I also wanted to comment on her idea of having like progress checks throughout class, which she mentioned, which is basically just the idea of students having some way to kind of show that they're paying attention. And this might be by answering like a short little kind of question halfway through class, or like maybe the professor sends out like a short little survey just daily, and then you kind of have to look into that and then answer the question with the right answer, which was shared like during lecture. Something like that I think is a good idea because it does kind of give the students a chance to refine their own knowledge while also showing that they are engaged. And then I also wanted to compliment Nicole on her plan because I thought it was very student centered. I think when we talk about like distractions in the classroom and how to reduce them, it's easy to kind of talk about ban this, ban that, but in her plan, she did a good job of making sure that students kind of had the freedom to still like use their tools and sit where they wanted and engage with the material. It wasn't just about like shutting them down. It was about kind of reworking the plan such that everyone was actually getting what they wanted, which I like that. I thought that was smart. But otherwise, that was everything that I had for assignment number 3 after talking with my classmates. Moving into assignment 4, today was about completing our internet motivation diary, and this was kind of built about back what I talked about in assignment number 1 with the Hewitt's definition of motivation and his classification of 7 sources of motivation. So this was a matter of like for the last 4 days we had to kind of map like over a period of time 20 different ways that we use the internet, what time we did that activity, what exactly we did, where we did it, what device we used, and then what 2 of the relevant motivators were for that task. So for example, at one point in my day, I accessed my work email, or just like my school email, I should say. I did this around noon. I did it from my apartment on my laptop. And the 2 motivators that I decided to attach to this were social and conative motivators. I said social because, email is a very social thing. I was communicating with other people to kind of keep my bonds with other people going and to sort of, like just interact with others and talk to them. And then conative, I said, was relevant because I like to respond to people in a timely manner, and this was kind of a way for me to keep up with what I like to do and sort of do things that I thought were important. And, like emailing people back at like a reasonable time, I think is important and I think it's respectful. So just something like that was like something that I like to do. But that was just kind of an example of what we did. And that was 20 times, again, like I said. So not like too difficult or anything. And it was just kind of nice to step back and take a look and see like, what do we do and why and how do we do it, which was pretty insightful, I thought. But anyhow, I took a screenshot of that diary and I uploaded it for my Unit 8 Assignment 4 little bit. And then I made a 200-word post where I talked about the classification of motivations that I discussed earlier at the start of this episode. And then I talked more about my specific motivations for using the internet during the period for which I kept this diary. And then I was asked to answer if my motivations varied or if I saw some patterns in them, if any of my motivations seemed more prominent than others, and if any of my motivations seemed to be associated with me being in like a certain place or using a certain device, or if it was a certain time of day. And I responded to this by saying that throughout the period during which I recorded my internet usage, I saw a decent amount of variation in my motivations for going online. I mean, there were definitely some motivators that occurred more often than others, though, and there were some that were rare or didn't show up at all. Like, for example, I did things for cognitive and conative reasons quite often, while I only did things for stimulus reasons once, and I never did anything for spiritual reasons. I wouldn't consider myself a very spiritual person, so this wasn't very surprising to me. But because I also did all of my work from home during this period during which I recorded, it was kind of hard for me to pull like information from that necessarily. But if I had to create some kind of meaning there, I would say that I engage with more entertaining content at home when I'm by myself and more work-related content when I'm gone at like class or studying somewhere. And I would definitely say that I use my phone for more like social interactions, as it's more of like a common and simple way to kind of use such a device. It is like a more like kind of, it has less processing power than like a laptop, and it's easier to kind of pull it out and just start using it. Where the laptop, you kind of have to like, maybe if it's in a backpack, you might have to like fish it out and like open it up and like log in. Whereas a phone is just like maybe putting in your password and that's it. But yeah, I would also say that just more generally, like early in the morning or late at night, I'm not as much in like a work mood, so I don't always like use my laptop for stuff like work. So I'm not gonna be like emailing as much or being on Canvas. I'm gonna be more like maybe watching movies or television shows or just texting friends, things like that. But otherwise, with my journal and everything being done for assignment number 4, I was able to submit it and move on. Assignment number 5 was pretty important because this is the part where we started to construct our new chat groups. There was a lot of kind of just red tape about who emails who and who sets up the group, but basically, the long story short is that I was in a new chat group. It was me and 2 other people. I was in a group with Sydney and Taylor, and we set up our first time to meet, and we decided to kind of just prepare. We knew we wanted to start working early because in our last groups we'd had experiences where we kind of, I guess, not necessarily were behind, but in this new one we started to kind of work earlier in the week to get the work done ahead of time, which was nice. But we ended up making a post where we talked about our group. I was in the hashtags group X. We shared our group name, our group members, who recruited us, who was going to use the browser, and then what time we were going to meet too. And for our first meet date, we decided to meet on October 27th from 12 to 1. But yeah, I ended up being recruited by Taylor, and as a result of this, it was my responsibility to sort of arrange with the group when a good time would be for us to meet, and then deciding like who would be responsible for using Chrome on the laptop. This would be me for this first kind of get together. And then I went to the discussion board posts and I made a post where again I kind of talked about all the stuff of who was in the group and what time we were meeting and all that. Because at this point in the course we were about halfway done, we were also told to go back and kind of reflect on the different set of skills and strategies that we wanted to develop as we were working in this course. This was back in episode 1, unit 1, assignment number 5. So this is kind of going back now, but I talked about how Since the start of this class, I've worked on my interpersonal skills, teamwork, and analytical skills just by basically like engaging with the different discussion posts that have been made. Like reading them and considering them and responding to them in unique ways has gotten me to think more deeply and consider like other ideas. I've also worked on my reflective thinking, creative communication, and information management by working on my final project. I would say that's definitely helped me to kind of think about planning and like considering large like amounts of information just because it all has to be packed into into this sort of project. And thinking about how to put it all together has done a lot to sort of help me think about how I like to put projects together. And then I would say that this class has definitely been effective in fostering like training in my writing and my communication skills just because I use them almost on a daily basis. You know, we highlight the importance of meeting deadlines and implementing like short deadlines to keep us on our toes and not like thinking about things that are way off in the distance and falling behind in our progress. And I mean, I just feel like I definitely witnessed all these techniques being implemented and they've helped me to learn for sure just because, I've gotten a chance to kind of work with them and apply them to my own learning. And then also back in that original post, we told another person in our lives about the skills and strategies we wanted to work on. And this time around, we were supposed to go back and kind of update that person on how we've been developing these skills and strategies. So I did. I went back to my friend and I told them about my progress so far. And they told me that they were happy to hear that I was developing all these kind of different skills. And they also told me that they hope that I was able to keep it up going forwards and that I'd continue to enjoy, the work that I've been doing with this class. So that was kind of a fun little opportunity to check back in with them and sort of kind of update them on the progress so far. That was everything for Unit 5 though. Going into Unit 6 then, right away we have our course review sheet. I made sure to upload everything from the previous units, but then getting to Unit 8, we were supposed to list 6 of Hewitt's sources of motivation and give one example of each motivation, taken from our diary of how that source of motivation has affected our use of the internet. So pulling from my diary, I talked about the stimulus response motivation. I talked about how I start messaging with my new chat group after getting a message from them. A matter of, I see a notification on my phone, and so I react to that to kind of talk to someone else. And then socially, I check my Instagram often just to see kind of what posts my friends are making and to see what kind of fun they're having and what trips they're going on and things like that. And then from a biological perspective, I read an article about selective breeding in pigs. And this I actually did because it was a part of homework that I had for a class. So the reason that I did this was to kind of reduce that discomfort about having said homework. And then in a cognitive sense, I researched how to repair my earbuds because they'd broken recently, the pair that I'd been using for about a year. And it was kind of annoying me that I couldn't use them. So I was looking up how to try and fix them, just to kind of give myself ideas maybe and to sort of figure out how to make any fixes. I'm not a super handy person, so that was kind of a process for me. And then on an affective level, I listen to music on Spotify. I just like music. It's fun for me. So that was just kind of something I did to feel good. And then on a cognitive level, I watched a class lecture online because I place a lot of importance on my schoolwork. I think it's important. And I just like to stay on top of it and I don't want to ever like fall behind with anything. And then we also listed 5 reasons as to why people binge watch TV shows. Going back to the professor's lecture video, the reasons that I cited are because it's fun, it's available and on demand, it's already paid for, it's what everyone else is doing, and because it enables sharing culture, because it's something that you can go around and kind of talk to with other people about. And I would say that I definitely agree with a lot of these, these sort of reasons. I do think it's fun to watch television shows, just with the action and the stories. And then being available is definitely a big deal, especially just being able to watch anything like YouTube or Netflix from your phone is so nice because it's you can basically do it anywhere then. And then, not having to pay for every single instance of every show, every episode is nice because you pay for a subscription model, so it's once you have it, you kind of just put it in the back of your mind and freely engage with it because it's really not much of a cost at that point. And then because it's what everyone else is doing is definitely a motivator too. Having just something to do that other people are doing is kind of nice and it's engaging and it's fun. And then because it enables a shared culture, it's definitely the most fun, I think, to watch a show that your friends are watching because you can kind of keep up on it with them and talk about it and share ideas and talk about characters. I would say that's definitely what makes it the most fun to engage with that kind of content because it creates discussion, which I appreciate the most. Going off of term project progress, it's It's kind of more of the same. It's about keeping that journal up and then, recording episodes to put out for the podcast and writing my 200 words where I talk about the project I've chosen, the whole course approach, the medium that I've chosen, which is my sort of podcast episode series, and then what work I've done, which, is really just a simple matter of keeping up the journal and then putting out the episodes too, making sure to record that. But then taking all that and, uploading it for Unit 8, Assignment 6 means that I'm done for this week. Yep, all done. Feels good.